Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. So like all of us, very heavy in routing and switching here at Cisco. I've been here for 26 years. And my DevOps journey for me, as Mike mentioned earlier, was really early on around Yang, before where Yang is now. I had some involvement I had some involvement around, the open source toolkit, Yang development kit, et cetera. And then of course I had customers interested in NSO, and like everything I try to do, is this was one of the use cases that came up for me that I want to share with you, just some questions I was asking, and it's specifically switching gears, going back to native models within iOS XR, and then how to tailor a netconf net and NSO to leverage explicit tailored Yang models, so you could build your own customized netconf net within NSO. And that's what I want to show you today. So the real goals of this is, just introduce you to what we're doing with XR native Yang models, these unified models, as I'll refer to them as. And I'll give you a quick little demo. We built a utility, CLI utility tool, and I'll show why it's important, what we're doing as well. It's a benefit for the operator, as well as, I'd say, a benefit for Cisco as they code. We don't really have to do it twice like we were doing it. And then what I want to do for this use case, because this was something I was interested in, was saying, hey, how do I build a NED then that leverages these new unified models? And I'm going to use the example of the unified models, but for you, it could be anything, any models that you specifically want. You can tailor a NED, a netconf NED, to look any way you want. And I'll show you how to do that as well, and we'll do a little quick demonstration on that also. This is just a quick reference for you on one of the versions I'm using here from an XR perspective, as well as NSO and netconf. So this introduction to these native unified models. So what are they? And so the idea of this is that we're taking the abstraction of Yang from CLI. And when I talk to network operators specifically, they're much more comfortable with the CLI, as we all know, as we move into this automation world, but they're much more comfortable with CLI. And those of you who've worked with netconf and did a get config and seen the XML representation of a router configuration, for example, from a Yang perspective, it's not very nice to look at. So what are we doing here with these CLI-based type capabilities? So what we're really doing in this scenario is we said, hey, this is how it was. We had a Yang config coming out of the schema. We had CLI coming out of CMD. It gave very much indeterministic, complex translations. It didn't read very well. So we had these two pillars. And really what we're doing with this unified config definition is going to CMD config, and we're leveraging the Yang config as well as the config CLI. And there's a ton of advantages that come out of this. One, the most obvious I'll show you in a minute, is a readability element. But the second one is just from a Cisco perspective, we only have to pull that from one area. So all the testing I do, all the policing I do, the full parity, I don't know if you folks are aware, but within XR, now iOS XE, any feature that comes out within XR that doesn't have a Yang model tied to it is viewed as a bug defect. So all features coming out now will be represented into a Yang model, and we can represent it in multiple ways. We can represent it in native, and as Steven just covered, in some ways we'll represent it in open config when possible as well. So what does this look like? And I'm going to switch back and forth today, just back between my examples here. And I have access here to an XRV router. And let me just show you what this looks like and what this utility looks like specifically. So what I want to do here is this is the basic config that we'll use today. Very basic. It's an interface. It's got a description, and then it's got an IP address, and this is represented obviously within a Yang model itself. And so when I start looking at this utility, I have the ability now to look at the config itself. Like this config, I can look at it. Steven is doing some awesome work in open config. He may say, look, I want to look at this in the open config format, which I can actually do here, right? So I can look at that config specifically in open config, and you can see from a CLI, somebody who's experienced in CLI, this is not a great representation, right? It's easy to read. It is for people like Steven who work with OpenConfig all the time, but from a CLI perspective and a network operator, maybe not as much. Here's what I love, and this is really the whole idea of what the unified model brings to us, is when I look at that same config, look how clean that interface is. And it's very much structured more based on the abstracts is pulled from the schema of CLI versus some other abstract type schema, which is what we've done in the past with the native models that exist today. And so that's really the idea and where we're going with that. And what I want to do now is I want to switch to, okay, well, first of all, here's the utility. And you guys, by the way, every screenshot I do today, including the demo coming up with NSO, I'll have screenshots for you in the PowerPoints that you can download. And then here's another, you can look at just XML in general, OpenConfig, etc. But let's move forward. So this brings me to the next part of this demo, which is really the meat of it. This is an NSO discussion. And I came to the point where I said, man, I'm using these. I want to do more with these unified models, but I want NSO to use those models. So I'm like, I'm assuming NSO is using these models if I'm using the netconf ned. And I want to give a quick shout out to my friend Tim Thomas, who is presenting later today. He was a big help to me on building this. But the whole idea of customizing a netconf ned, what is that? Well, NSO offers the ability, and I'll say it has a utility that allows us to customize a netconf ned. And the idea of customizing a netconf ned would be, I take a netconf ned and then I select what YANG models I want to be a part of that specific ned. And what was interesting, and I want to do a before and after here for you, with you, is when I just went out and said, well, look, I'm assuming that we're using these new unified models in that version of the netconf ned I was using. And what was interesting about that is the answer is no, I was not. And no, we were not, but I'll show you. And eventually we will, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But let me go to the NSO piece of this. So first piece of this, what I did, let me log in real quick. Here's what I'm going to do for the demo. This is really cool because I'm going to talk about this when we wrap this up on some of the use cases, specifically as they apply to federal. Some of you operators in some of these large federal networks, but it could apply anywhere. What I did was I took that device that we just looked at that I was on with CLI, that XRV device. And what I did was I created its XRV CPN. And then I have this XRVNC. So first on CPN here is using the out-of-the-box netconf ned in version 7.4. So I'm just using what came off the shelf from that. And what you'll see as I go through this demo, and I'll come to this in a minute, is the idea that I can leverage this. What I did was created a tailorized ned that uses all of the unified models. And you'll see how NSO starts consuming or representing its XML configuration using those models instead of the I'll just say legacy Cisco XR native models as well. So let me step through this real quick. So let's see, let's take a look at the running config of that particular device with the out of the box ned, right? So and that was CPN, and then we'll display it. Let's display it in XML, and I'll go through here. Let's see, where is she? Just a little bit further down. You'll see in this particular part of the configuration here, you can see that there's no unified model being used here. Right, so it's using what the NSO developers, by the way, they don't just pick this out of the sky, right? Now, they're eventually going to transition to that, but right now they're using another YANG model as representation within that ned. What was interesting to me here was, what is that? Device, and I want to look at that device again. But I had that here. Was it check? Yeah, it's check YANG models. So you can check the YANG models which is pretty interesting here. You can check the Yang models, and this is what I did is I started looking at it from an investigative stage perspective. I'm like, all right, well, I know these Yang models are in there because it's a netconf net, so I'm doing a capabilities exchange on this, and you can see all. But when I get up here, I say, oh, cool, here the unified models are in here, and I'll go up to the one that I'm going to use for today, which is a little higher up here. I apologize. But anyway, regardless of which one, and I'll show you this one in a minute. I think I already overshot it. The idea is what it was saying is this status, it was saying not loaded, right? So the idea is that it's not loaded. So I'm like, all right, well, if it's not loaded, then how do I go about getting it loaded? And that's really what really brings me to the piece here around the NetBuilder. And let me get back out of this. So if I look at this NetBuilder for NEDs, and I put this up here for you. By the way, I'll have this. We'll have more details on it. And by the way, the documentation is fantastic on this. But this is the workflow for building your own NED using NetConf NetBuilder. And you can see as you go through this little workflow here, you get down in here. My fault. You get down in here where you say select, and then you can choose the Yang models that you want to be a part of that specific NED. You say select, you build the NED, you do a packages reload, etc. You know, you make clean of the NED, etc. And you do that. So like we're used to for loading a specific NED. So what I wanted to do here is show you the before and after. Now remember, first thing I wanted to do here is this is kind of cool, and let me just do this. You can see that there's this command in here when I do a dev. I'm very familiar with devices, but you have dev tools. And this dev tools is a utility for developers, and it just enhances more capabilities within NSO. So what I do is I want to enable that, and you just say a true. And let me do this. I want to do a show devices list again. And what I want to do now for this second part of the demo, I want to use this XRVNC. And I want to do the same thing, but because that uses my unified model, which is the tailorized NED that I did, I want you to see how NSO handles that in the same show running configuration that we just did, right? So the first thing I can do is I want you to see I did this project. So it's show netconf, what is it? NED project build status. So in my build status, you can see I called this project. Let me get this guy out of here. This is bothering me. Apologize for that. So you can see I called this unified model project models. And then what I want to do here is I want to actually go and say, let's take a look at that show running config again. But I want to change the device. So if I do this show display here, but I want to go and change this guy to using the device that uses my tailorized unified model NED, which is NC. So I do the same thing here in show running config. And right away, which is really cool about this, you can see if I look at the same interface representation here, you can see here that this now, the representation of that interface within NSO is using that unified model, which is totally cool, right? And now if I want to take this, let me take this and let's look at, see what the status of that model is as well. So I was looking before at, let me find it, check Yang models, and I can do a begin with this guy, this model. Let me do a more on that so it'll start there. And now with this new model, if I look up here, I'm sorry, I got to change. That's a good mistake because you can see what I didn't do is I didn't change it. That was the old model up there, which says not loaded. Now, if I go to this and I say netconf and I do that same command where it said not loaded, now you can see up in here, it says status supported. Right, so it gave me that capability now. So that's what's being used. It does that capabilities exchange, and by me modifying with NetBuilder, that NED, now that Yang model is now being used as representation for NSO, which is awesome. And you say, well, Craig, how do I look at this in another place? The other area that you can look at this I was in this packages already here. So if I just look at this, you can see there's my unified model here under packages. So if we just do an LS on that guy, and let's say, well, and then of course, you go source and Yang. Here, you can see all the Yang models that now are included after I use this when I did it with NetBuilder and I built it in this project. Within here in this net now, I've got all these models, as you can see in here. And the cool thing about the NetBuilder tool, you can also build these tailorized NEDs with a command line as well. But using the NetBuilder tool, one of the things I found with some help of some of the folks on the panel is that what it does is it also, the NetBuilder tool also includes the dependencies. So it'll build those dependencies in there for me as well, which is really, really nice. So, once I did this, I didn't have to modify anything after that. And, this is where I really want to bring this home is, okay, key takeaways. We talked about the unified models, some really cool things happening there, but this NetConf NetBuilder is really what I wanted you to focus on and to a couple use cases. Here's a great use case. As I look at a network, maybe a larger network that some of you operate, you can look at I got core, edge, aggregation, etc. One of the things I found is that, or discovered, is that some of these large operators, what they do when they use NSO is they tailorize these NEDs only to leverage the Yang models that they want. So for example, in the core network, it's very lean. I don't need a lot of features, right? So I could customize my NetConf NED for core, call it, NetConf NED core, and it would be very lean to just the Yang models I need there. Then I go to the edge, be very selective there, go to aggregation. So the idea is that I'm only using the Yang models that I need in that NED. It keeps it lean. You could almost bring a level of security because I'm not inducing things that I don't need to corrupt the NED in general. In federal, you can see that from a security perspective. Maybe I want to be selective on how I check the Yang models first before I bring them into the NED. I just liked it. It keeps it nice and lean, lightweight, fast, optimal, etc., and very much more easier to manage. So with that, I want to say, that's that. You'll get the screenshots of everything I did. I am going to post this demo and walk you through the NetBuilder in a repo I have on my front page here when I did my intro. So you'll get access to that as well. And